Well, hello, Living Streams, and anybody not from Living Streams who's hanging out with us today. Welcome to our Deep Dive podcast. I got David Stockton hanging out with me today.
Hello today, huh?
A shalom. Shalom, everybody.
Yeah, the hello. I think that's a very specific greeting.
Yeah.
That means
hello.
you're feeling pretty peaceful, I feel.
Yeah. Feeling
Can't be stressed
chill.
out and say, well, hello.
Yeah, that's true. It feels kind of Mr. Rogersy a little bit.
Yeah.
You change our shoes.
Hey, everybody.
That's
I feel like I say that all the time.
That's your jam. It's funny.
Well, because you get up at church, it's like, I don't know what to say.
Hey.
It's my third service. Hey, everybody.
Yep, that's true. How's it going?
Yeah.
It's funny the things that you do that feel repetitive that nobody else does, but then the things that you do that do not feel repetitive that everyone's like,
you always
say that. It's having it's fun now that having a 2-year-old, it's like, oh, you start to see some of that
they repeat
coming at you. You're like, oh, is that a you thing or is that a you doing me thing? I don't know where that came from.
That's funny.
Silas has been saying maybe a lot lately. Maybe. And I think it's a him thing.
Our girls now, teenage girls, I don't know where they're getting what they say. It's definitely not from us. Yeah. I never even heard these words before in my life.
Yeah, that is the role. I preached in the youth service this last Sunday for the first time in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And about halfway through being cool and using a youth coolism, I realized, I think I'm like
6 years behind.
6, 7, 8 years behind. Like this was lingo. It felt like 5 seconds ago.
Eva's saying whippersnatch all the time now.
Oh,
it's like, the whippersnatch that, the dog whippersnatch that, or why you got whippersnatch,
The whippersnatch is supposed to be like a little, like you're a little whippersnatch.
I don't even know what
But she's doing it like snatching.
It's a verb that.
It's a verb.
Has a wide range.
That's like curmudgeon-y, old British man word, and it's a noun.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's all right. That's the way it goes.
She loves it.
It's shocking how quickly
she's strong with that word. Yeah,
the youth lingo changes. Like
totally.
5 seconds ago, I was a youth pastor, and I was the old guy who kind of knew enough to sound stupid, but not that stupid.
Yeah.
And now I'm not even there.
A lot these days.
Not even there. But you brought us through a little message on shalom and family. Mm-hmm. Give us a quick recap, and
you want a quick whippersnatch of it?
Oh, quick whippersnatch. If you could just whippersnatch out, your notes and. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So again, we're tracking through another sermon series called Shalom, which is peace, the Hebrew word for peace, but it's thick and wide and strong and bold. The whole idea of shalom. I've been toying with this a little bit. You know how when Buddhism they talk about kind of nirvana, mm-hmm. And for them it's this it's like you've kind of gotten to a level of thinking. Literally, it's thought and kind of emotional disconnect from the chaos of the world, mm-hmm. and you're now in this enlightened nirvana type place. And then each religion kind of has their version of what that is. And I think shalom, obviously for Judaism, but within Christianity, I think it's the kingdom of heaven. It's the righteousness, joy, and peace mm-hmm. in the Holy Spirit. But I love it because it's not a detachment from the world.
Yeah. It
actually is like embedded in the world. Mm-hmm. It's a peace that passes understanding. It's a peace that guards your hearts. It's the eye of the storm within the storm. It's not let's get out of here, or let's stop feeling, mm-hmm. stop thinking, let's become kind of mindless and free. It's actually no, let's feel full humanity and full divinity of God kind of with us. God with us. That's shalom.
Yeah.
God with us
mm-hmm.
in whatever situation might be. So I've been thinking about shalom in just that broader sense, but righteousness, joy, and peace in the Holy Spirit. But so we've been talking about that, and then we said, what is the biblical path to relational peace? Because relationships oftentimes cause us the opposite of peace.
Yeah.
But then this week we focused on what is the biblical path to family peace. And I listed a number of family scenarios mm-hmm. That I'm closely connected to through friends in my own family, including a daughter coming home one day and saying she's a lesbian or she's not sure. which gender she is, or a dad coming home and saying, "Hey, I'm not only cheated on your mom, but I'm going to marry a girl who's you went to high school with," to the daughter, and then eventually even sex change and kind of that progression, to finding vape pens, to, having your son tell you he was, messing around with some naked pictures and things of himself, and now someone's blackmailing him, telling him he's going to kill him if he doesn't get money.
Yeah.
These are all very real scenarios, and they're just happening all the time. And so I read 8 of them, and I said, how many pinged? And it was interesting because you could just think, well, probably maybe all 8 of them, someone's at least knows someone that's been in those scenarios. And then in the room, with that many people we have, there are probably people going, I got ones that would make all these look like child's play.
Yeah.
So, Matt Kearney, I've quoted Matt Kearney, one of my favorite songwriters, and he says, we're all just one phone call away from our knees.
Yeah.
And I just, whenever I hear that line, I go, gosh,
Yeah. No.
wow. And then also I'm like, Lord, please.
Yeah.
Lord, please let my girls make it home tonight. Lord, please let them make good decisions. Lord, please help me to hang in there. And because I just know so often, a guy, you hear stories about the dad or the husband just blowing up the family, with some decisions that they make and all of that. So family can be a lot of pressure. Family can be a lot of challenge. So what's the biblical path to family peace? And really, Jesus. First and foremost, it's always Jesus. He is the peace. And he taught his disciples that they can miss it. As he was approaching Jerusalem, he said, if you only knew what would bring you peace, but you're not willing. And I think so you can miss the peace. And so we talked about all of that. You can miss Jesus, and we don't want to miss Jesus. How do we miss Jesus? Too much hurry, too much noise, don't hear the still small voice. And so that's the first one. The second thing that we said is the biblical path to family peace really comes down to the fathers not being harsh with their wives and not provoking their children, which in some ways is don't be harsh with your children either.
Yeah.
And I think that does circle around to wives and moms. Don't be harsh with your husbands and your kids. And kids, instead of being harsh with your parents, honor your parents.
Yeah.
Celebrate the good in them instead of tripping over the negative or the bad in them. And so I don't know, I felt like that was just a simple step. Try and remove the harshness from your speech, from your language, from your tone, all those things. That would probably be one real easy, practical, biblical step towards creating a family that's full of peace. Because we can break each other with our words. That's what it says. It says, fathers, don't provoke your children and make them discouraged, lest they become discouraged. And the word discouraged there, I mean, I think I've felt that before, where my dad was just too hard on me one time, or a couple, like more than once. But I remember that feeling of just, he wasn't realizing how he was crushing my spirit. And he was quick to recognize that and say sorry, and he gave us great blessing and encouragement when you measure out the whole grand scheme of things. But it was just sometimes I would be maybe in a vulnerable spot, and he would come with a harsh word. It's just devastating.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I went home from Sunday, and I was so convicted. And I don't know if I don't think.
Isn't that the worst when God preaches to you with your sermon?
Well, it was happening all week, but then the sermon was even more. Just thinking of, I feel like I've set a tone in my family for some harsh word or some harshness.
Yeah.
And that's not like we're yelling and screaming, but I see it in my girls. What you were just saying, they repeat,
Yeah.
And so, but now they're teenagers, and they're speaking harshly to each other, or harshly to their mom or to me, and it's like, oh gosh, I taught them that.
Yeah.
Or speaking condescendingly. That's kind of the more. I don't really yell tons, but I can just be so critical and so condescending so easily. I'm always having to work on that. And so that was the gist of the message on Sunday.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking a little bit about listening to your message, and it was a really good message. But I was thinking about I preached on, I don't know if it's the same passage or one of the adjacent ones or one of the similar ones. There's 2, 3, 4 passages that are very similar in the New
Well,
Testament.
Ephesians and Colossians rules for the household are almost identical.
Yeah, and exactly what's happening in there is it's talking about household management, which we talked about.
Oikos.
A little while ago. Yeah, in the Oikos, and John Chong was giving us some really good resources on that. But it's a big theme, not just in the New Testament, but the New Testament is tapping into a cultural dialogue about how do you manage a household, because it is the structure. It was understood and not contentious to understand. This is like the base unit of society is the household, which their household, like you talked about on Sunday, was larger than what we view as our household. It included the entire clan, kind of, right? So it was like oldest living male, so grandpa or great grandpa, and everybody under him, plus servants, plus some people who are
I mean, it was real patriarchy. I mean, that
yeah,
word gets thrown
yeah,
around right now, but
yeah,
that
it's
was
actual
patriarchy.
legitimate, yeah. And then the clients, so people who aren't servants but who are economically tied and have basically been adopted into the family, economically and relationally, right? So dozens of people in this household. And so in the ancient Greco-Roman world, going all the way back to Plato and before, was conversation of how do we manage this? I was thinking it's kind of like the way we talk about time management in our culture, right? Which we're obsessed with time management. I mean, how many books over the years have you read that are mentioning time management? How many sessions and trainings and conferences have you been at where they're discussing time management and organizational management and stuff like that? They were as obsessed with household management as we are with that. And Paul is actually engaging that, and in my opinion, directly countering some of the statements of Plato, which I preached on that a few years ago, so I won't repeat it too much in there. But essentially, Plato is saying, "Hey, dads are great. Everybody else sucks and is worth barely anything. The servants, and the structure is the servants, the children, the servants, the wives." And Plato only addresses the men, and then basically says, the others, like, virtue's not really that important to them because they're just little peons. Paul, I think, is countering that, and if you look in the Greek, he's using words that are directly correlated to each of the to the children, to the wife, to the servant, and encouraging the men to engage in that, basically. So essentially what he's saying, that might have been a little unclear. What he's saying is, hey, fathers, you're not all that matters here. You're not the only source. You're not the end all, the be all. Learn from your wives. Learn from your children. Learn from your servants, and engage in the kind of things that they're doing well. And so, like, in particular, I think that I'd have to look at the passage to speak to it more intelligibly than that. But he's directly correlating his verbiage there. He's saying, Anyway, that's a little bit what's going on there, and I think it's worth noting. I think the key takeaway I would take right here would just be there was something really beautiful in the Greco-Roman world in the fact that they saw household management as really important and something worth discussing over and over and over again. And I think it's worthwhile for us to put as much thought into that. How much effort in your life have you put into time management? Can you try and devote that much energy to how do I manage my household, whether I'm father, mother, husband, wife, child? This is something worth excelling at, because even though it's a natural thing, excellence in it isn't natural. Just like we all have time and we all do stuff, but excellence in managing that isn't natural.
And family gets tricky pretty quick.
Yeah.
I mentioned the one guy who's both his parents and his wife's parents split and got remarried. So now he's got 8 of them.
Yeah.
He's got 8, 4 moms, 4 dads, sort of, dad-in-law,
Yeah.
So it's been, and then the kids have these 8 grandparents. So birthday becomes a very interesting time where he's got to manage all of this coming together. That's a challenge. I know guys who are, have married children, get divorced, get remarried, and now they're having to manage their wife and the children with that woman, plus the responsibility they have for the children that they had with their ex-wife, and managing that, like blended family
Yeah.
type thing. So the family dynamic, it becomes tricky, and whatever you marry into, right? So you marry into a family, and then there's a responsibility in that regard.
Yeah.
Where I mean, it's fascinating, the complexities that can happen
Yeah.
in those external, not to mention, just your own nuclear family can be complex enough.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing I emphasize too, is like the Greco-Roman prescription for household and family is not the biblical one
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
The biblical concept of family and responsibility, the biblical idea that God ordained family, a mom, a dad, and the kids. That's it.
Yeah.
There's not supposed to be all these other complexities.
Yeah.
Although sin is in the world, and so there are. But that's what it's supposed to be. And if we get that right, then everybody's taken care of. That's what I love about that. If the husband is laying down his life for the wife, and the wife's laying down her life for the husband, and the parents are laying down their lives for the kids, and eventually the kids grow up and lay down their lives for the parents, everybody's always taken care of. It's such a beautiful thing. And because it's endowed with the full, presence and power of God, it is strong enough to make sure there is good. It is the governance that the world needs.
Yeah.
But because of sin, because of brokenness, because of all these things, we have, other ideas. We have governance. And the statistical reality is, the sociological proof is endless about this concept of nuclear family, not the Greco-Roman one. It produces the greatest human flourishing.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason in America in particular, and in the Greco-Roman world, they kept coming up with something else that they thought would better. Even Plato and all his wisdom, it's like, gosh, the biblical answer is the path to family peace, and healing the world even.
I would add one little adjustment, not in exactly what you're saying, but just in clarification maybe, is I think God does view the family as, in America, we're very strict about, my family is me, wife, kids. We don't include cousins. We don't include grandparents. You know what I mean? And yes, there's a leave and cleave that you see in Genesis for sure. There is a distinct circle around that direct, immediate family, But I do think the Lord has ordained grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. And I think in our culture we have a tendency to shed those other parts of our family off and distance ourselves from them more than pleases the Lord. But it is that family, that blood family that the Lord has ordained, I think, as the smallest measure of governance in the world. And
that's
it's fruitful.
I think that's where there's a balance too there, because if the nuclear family can be well taken care of and healthy and strong, it has such capacity to care for, for others to be experiencing the blessing of that. There's a ripple effect of goodness that comes out from there, and that can cover in case of a death of a loved one, or someone who's turned away from common sense or righteousness or whatever, and there needs to be some covering. I think that's the power and beauty of that family. But I also think that we can only, like, we have to be careful that we don't extend our responsibilities so broad that we now jeopardize that. And I think there's a balance in that regard too. I've tried to take on things, in particular for us, foster care. Like, foster care is something we've done. We've had 5 different placements in our home, but we have to balance that out very, very carefully to make sure we don't crush what it is we do have. We've had there's a young guy that I just kind of mentored and was part of my life, and he ended up with an SMI, and in the midst of all of that, we still
serious
decided,
mental illness for anybody who...
and schizophrenic, and yet my whole family decided, he should live with us for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And he lived with us for a year and a half as a 20-year-old schizophrenic.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. It was wonderful. And he describes it as kind of the best years of his life because he was around that stability. He was around that health. But we didn't do that all the time. And we were very careful about how we did that. And I think by the time we found him another place to live, and he went and lived there because he was trying to be on his own. The amount of like the weight we weren't even so aware that we were carrying was intense. And even foster care is like, once we would say yes, we had to be careful when we'd say yes, check with our girls, all those things. And then after a season, when 18 months the boys went home, it was like, okay, we're just going to need to breathe for a second here before we jump in again. And it's funny, even now my wife was saying, I think we should probably renew our license. And so I checked with our daughters, and they all were like, yeah. And I was like, are you serious? So it is funny. And I think as a father, we carry a weight. The mom carries a weight, the kids carry a weight. But as a father, we do carry a weight that we have to be honest with ourselves too. What can we handle and what can we not handle? Yeah. And it's hard for us to be honest because we're just like, oh, we should handle everything, and we just get strong. But there's a point in your life, I think it's 46, where you can't just throw another shrimp on the Barbie. You can't just throw another responsibility on there, because at this point you're at least plateauing, if not declining in strength. And all of from really 18 to let's say 45, 46, my answer was, just chuck it on there. I'll carry more. Throw a mortgage on there. That's fine. I'll carry that. Throw a wife. Throw kids. Throw some foster kids. Throw job responsibilities. Throw car loans and insurance. Like, just keep. It was just like, we'll just throw that on there. And I just kept growing into that strength by the grace of God. And then there's a point at which, and I think that's what midlife crisis is more than anything, is guys keep throwing stuff on there, unaware that their strength is diminishing. And there's a point at which their knees are about to buckle. And so they have midlife crisis. They either, blow up somehow, or like mental health, or, they cheat on their wife, or they do something because the pressure becomes so intense
they're
that they're just like
throwing away a bunch of that.
Or sometimes they just split. They literally just are like, I can't take this weight, so they leave it all. None of that is good and right and healthy. None of that is excusing them either from these things. But I talk to guys a lot of times, just say, it's not midlife crisis. It's just you've been adding your entire life and always had the strength to meet it. But at some point, your strength goes down. And you can't just keep adding. And if you do, your knees, your heart, your mind, they're going to buckle. And so trying to make those adjustments, small adjustments, so you don't have drastic ones, right? But
you're beginning to transition from being the boots on the ground, the front lines hero, to being the source of wisdom for those guys. Which isn't to say that you aren't still in the fight, but there is a transition at some point to being the older support, the older source, as opposed to I don't know, the muscle, or I'm not sure exactly.
I just think it's more of it's just realizing, from here on out, my answer can't be just throw it on my shoulders. Even though we'd like to think that, there's just a capacity at some point. And so to make those adjustments doesn't mean you're not, still able to care and you're still all those things. You're not going to break yourself, because if you break, then everyone experiences that breaking. And I think that's a bit of what I was sensing too when he was talking specifically to fathers in that sense. Don't be harsh, don't provoke. Because when that weight is really, getting heavier and heavier, I feel like that's when fathers get harsher and harsher. And what they're expressing through the, short fuse, or what they're expressing through the harshness or the yelling. I mean, it's what happens to me when I'm really under a lot of pressure, or I'm really like frustrated about something outside the house. then when my daughters do something frustrating or don't, clean something the first time I ask,
Yeah.
like there's this intensity that can come out, and really it's I mean, sometimes it's them just being lazy and ornery,
Yeah.
but a lot of times it's just I don't have grace, and this harshness comes out towards them, and so that's lots of apologies there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what I was getting at earlier too with how Paul's kind of combating Plato is part of what Paul is saying, like an underlying principle in the instruction that Paul gives to fathers is basically, and I think this is applicable to everyone in the family, look around at the people in the family, see what they're doing that is good and right and honors God, and learn from that. And as Paul's saying essentially to the fathers, hey, what's your wife doing well? What's your kids doing well? What's the servant, the pedagogue
Where are
doing
you
well?
getting that from?
I'd have to unpack it a bit more,
Okay.
but I unpacked it pretty thoroughly in a message on
I remember the message.
Ephesians, yeah. But essentially, the verbiage that Paul is using in that passage when he gives instructions to the fathers is one-to-one, cueing in on verbiage that would be, like I think he says, fathers teach your children. Is that right? Something along those lines? And
Not
that word...
not in those passages, but I mean, I do know what you mean. Where he's telling the fathers, you don't get to do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's
You're
much
not-
more in the Greek than in the English. But the vocabulary he's using, like the instruction that he gives for fathers, I think concerning the kids is rooted in the same word as pedagogue. So he's that one I can remember at least. So he's basically saying, hey, learn from the pedagogue, which would be the servant who raises up the kids, how to interact with the kids. So he's and that's one for one. Every instruction that he gives is correlated to the wife, the child, or the servant. He's essentially saying, learn. It's embedded in the Greek of what he's saying, but it's in its connotation, not denotation,
Well,
right?
it must be separate from the rules for the household and
it's in the
Ephesians
household.
and Colossians.
If I
But
had
I'm
time,
saying in those two passages, because he's very specific about he says to the fathers this, to the wives this, to the children this, to the maidservants this, or men servants, and so he's and each one of them gets their own command. But as far as the father, I mean, very against what would have been Greco-Roman mindset is fathers. You don't get to just be whoever you want or do whatever you want.
Yeah.
With all of these people, but instead he's actually speaking to them, knowing that some of them are coming to Christ, and they have freedom in Christ.
Yeah.
They have equality in Christ. He's definitely rocking that boat a little bit. And even with the wives submitting to the husbands and the husbands laying down their life for the wives, that's what the authority's for. And your authority is not to crush your children. Your authority is to encourage and build up your children. Yep. So he's definitely meddling with that. But yeah, that other stuff, that'd be interesting. And I do remember you teaching on it, but I think it must have been probably from a different passage or something.
Yeah, I think if we were in for a super long podcast, I'd dig it up and we'd pull it up. But
I do, and I remember it being good back then. Yeah,
but let's take a little bit of a page turn here.
Well, I got one more thing on that. Didn't make the notes.
Go for it.
That I thought this is kind of funny and kind of helpful. So, John Piper, who's I actually think is a great Bible teacher.
Yeah.
Sometimes his theology teachings aren't as clear to me. I feel like he sets up if this is true, then these have to be true. And it's like, well, yes, but can we go back? Because you just said this is true. And I don't know if that's a slam dunk is what you're saying it is. But yes, if that is a slam dunk, then these follow. But this isn't a slam dunk, so I can't
reject your premise.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny how he's very good at setting up arguments like that. But as far as just teaching the Bible, I think he's incredible, and he doesn't have bad theology. It's just maybe I have some points where I'm not quite as all in as him. But he's came up with what it means in some ways to not be harsh with your children or provoke. Mm-hmm. And it's funny; these are 8 words that he said and described them. So in case you're wondering what it means to not provoke your children, or maybe be harsh with your wife, or maybe be harsh with your husband, or provoke your parents, or you could go all the way around it. He says nagging. Nagging. he says, don't try and get obedience by nagging your kids. That would be considered to him. Don't be demanding. Don't try and get obedience by being the dad that only demands. And then he said, getting angry. Don't try to get obedience by setting the tone where every requirement sounds angry. Where you just, if you don't do it, I'm going to be angry. I've tried all of these. I've tried all of these. Always resorting to the rod. Don't try and get obedience by always using blows. Embarrassing them. Don't try and get obedience by embarrassing the child. I've seen so many parents who the child is doing something that embarrasses them.
Yeah.
And so then because they're getting embarrassed, they respond to the child and embarrass the child.
I see a lot of people, even my peers, who are so careless with their kids, and even not out of malice. Like it's fun to make fun of your kids, and you make fun of them in front of your kids, thinking your kids don't know. And I catch myself wanting to fall into that a little bit, and it's like, your kid knows. Your kid knows from a very young age what it is to be embarrassed.
Yeah.
And when they're little like mine, they don't know how to say, "Hey, that embarrassed me.
Yeah.
Please don't do that."
Yeah.
And then we wonder why kids grow up and then shame their parents and disrespect their parents.
Yeah.
Well, they grew up getting
So
that.
belittling, don't try and get obedience by belittling your child. He said an example for that is just speaking in a way that, feels contempt. Or that's probably the condescending a little bit, like, oh, you're going to be a little baby or something like that. He said that's not helpful, and that's something that could break their spirit. Don't demand things that are impossible. Don't set the bar so high that it is basically they don't have a chance.
Yeah.
They're always falling short. Help them find wins. You're trying to get them to progress to a high place. That's fine. But set the bar at places where, as they develop, they can hit those marks and feel what it feels like to progress. And then the last one is withholding forgiveness. And I think that one, he says perhaps that's most important at all. But basically it's like, if you don't do what I want you to do, then I'm going to hold this grudge against you and just make you feel that all the time. And, forgiveness is so important in family and relationship because we all suck.
Yeah.
we all are manipulative. We all can be harsh. And I think that's and what I've kind of been telling my girls is I realize this and I want to change this, but just so you know, I'm probably going to mess up again. But I'm going to be more aware and hopefully be quicker to notice it and quicker to respond. But at least and I know that I'm aware. And I'm also going to, when you are harsh, I'm going to try and mention it to you. And I want you to receive it and not, just fight against it or be like, oh, yeah, well, you're harsh. And whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I think the forgiveness thing is a big deal. And parents and kids. So parents, it's easy to maybe even harbor a little resentment for your child, and they'll feel that, and it'll crush their soul. And then, children, whether you're adult or not, your parents can feel if you're holding resentment against them, and you have to fight against that.
Yeah.
And that means there probably are very good reasons for you to have resentment against them.
Yeah.
But you don't want that in your soul.
Yeah.
That God has every reason to resent us, but instead he's chosen to forgive us. So I just thought that list of 8 was such a good way to expand on what harsh or what exacerbating or provoking could look like. So I was thankful for that.
That's really good. And I think it's one of those kind of preconditions maybe for restoration and healing and growth.
Yeah.
I guess not that those things can't happen with some harshness around, but they're not going to happen. They're certainly less likely to happen with the weight of harshness around.
Yeah.
And it is really worth paying attention to. What is the condition of the common attitude of my family? the frequent attitude. I don't know. I'm stumbling to find words for what I'm saying, but like what is our subculture, the subculture of our family? What is our posture towards one another on a regular basis?
Yeah.
I mean,
What's
that's probably
the
the right word.
tone?
The posture,
Yeah.
the tone. I think posture and tone are the right words for what I'm looking for, because the posture you get in a posture,
Yep.
and just like your actual posture, right? You don't realize what's going on until something's coming up funny. Like this is a silly, stupid comparison, but I think it's the point. Like I had my back a little over a year ago. All of a sudden, my tailbone started going out of place. And for like 2 months, it was actually excruciating because it was knocking out other parts of my back pretty bad. And I couldn't walk straight for months. And then even when it got past the painful spot, like even still, my tailbone goes out often and I like walk a little funny. It's gotten a lot better. But when it was at its worst, I was walking for so many months with just a weird limp that I developed this big old callus on my right big toe that I'd never had before, just because,
just that little bit
just
of
from the
alignment.
walking, just from the way I was walking, and it had these consequences. And I think we can get used to something, or something can be out of alignment, and it can have these consequences that we don't realize. And sometimes the first, obviously for me in that situation, I realized the excruciating pain in my back first, but sometimes we don't realize the pain, and we don't realize we're walking funny until there's a symptom, until there's a callus or something that's a little bit funky going on. And then sometimes even then you just it's a callus, right? You callus over, it feels normal. And our postures towards one another in our house, they feel normal.
Yeah.
And they're not normal sometimes. They're not healthy. And even if they are normal, if they're not godly, that's not all right. Even if everybody else's family is that way, I don't want my family to be that way. Like I was just saying with, parents making fun of their kids to their friends. Like, I don't care if all my friends do that. I don't care if the internet has giant holes of content of people making fun of their kids. I don't want to do that.
I know we can be pretty sarcastic people, and it's most of the time it's fun, for everyone. But it's funny, you can just see sometimes, one of us, 5, my wife and then our 3 daughters, you can just see that it's a moment where the sarcasm isn't funny, or it's that whatever situation's going on inside their soul, it's like that's a painful thing now. And we have to, we've probably gotten too much this way and we need to rein it in, or it's just, hey, we need to be a little more sensitive to each other and what everyone's going through. And so that's a big deal. And my wife's pretty good at, sounding the alarm when she's like, the tone is not right in our family right now. We try and, recalibrate. It's getting harder and harder as they're getting more teenage and even more adult. But we've been doing these Sunday night family meetings. And in those family meetings, we'll talk a little bit about the tone. How's everyone feeling? Most of the time, we can just say, hey, what's going on this week? Highs and lows. What's the Lord showing you? What would you like prayer for? Sometimes I'll share something that's just kind of a big deal for me. But, frequently we'll also say, hey, I feel like there's this kind of coming up. I used to always talk to my daughters about the weeds. I said, hey, I'm your dad, and it's my job to make sure you're this beautiful garden. And so whenever I see some weeds growing up, it's my job to pick those weeds right now. And someday it's going to be your job to pick those weeds, and to be aware of them and all of those things. But right now I need to. And so I want to talk to you about something I'm seeing grow up. If I can come to them with the right tone and say that kind of thing to them, they've always been very receptive. But if I just try and pick those weeds with an angry face, they don't like that much for some reason. So, but the tone and posture, I think, is a big deal. And that is what he's getting at. I think he's saying, and in his mind, he's saying, fathers, especially probably in the Greco-Roman world, you are the ones setting the tone. So I'm telling you that there's a Jesus way that is not the Greco-Roman way.
Yeah.
And you should set that tone with your wives and with your children. And then told us the story of the prodigal father, right?
Yeah.
Who is just so amazing.
Yeah.
You heard that story a billion times, and you just cannot be moved. Or
Yeah.
you cannot help but be moved
Yeah.
by the father at the edge of his property, not being harsh with his rebellious son who's spent half of their fortune, but instead throws the robe on him, puts his ring on his finger, and says, I got a party out back.
Yeah,
Let's
that
go.
story is deep and rich.
And that's our father.
Yeah.
And then it's funny because I sat down at the end of the message, and second service, it was just 2 right now, I just had this sense. I mean, it's a little bit of, how you have the, I wish I would have said this. And it was some of that, but it also felt like the Lord was putting on my heart that I should have said to everyone, hey, which I said, that's God, the God's heart is not harsh towards you, all those things. But maybe you grew up in a household that all you experienced from your father was harsh.
Yeah.
And whether you think you did or not, whether you wanted to or not, you have put that on your relationship with God. And you can't help but see God through your father's eyes.
Yeah.
And I just want to first say to you on behalf of your dad, who maybe may not say it or not, but sorry. That is not what you were supposed to experience. You weren't supposed to be broken by harsh words. Your Father in heaven does not feel that way about you. I wish I could have landed the plane and said that a little clearer. But I did have, one lady came up and she said, thank you so much for saying what you said. And she was talking about the way she grew up and in some ways I think realizing, oh man, I grew up with such a harsh father, and I have thought of God as being harsh, and it's been hard for me to figure it all out. So, that was one other little thing that came out of the message, that God's heart is not harsh.
No.
And he's perfect, and we mess up so many times, and he's still not harsh.
Yeah. He's so gentle and forgiving. And that turnaround is so doable. I mean, I've shared this before, but my dad grew up with a very abusive dad, and my dad was the most gentle man I've ever met. Yeah. And that's all because of Jesus. And for what it's worth, my grandpa and all of his dysfunction and anger and abuse, I only met the guy when I was a baby, but knew the Lord, pointed my dad to the Lord, and my dad said the one and the greatest thing that my dad gave me was he pointed me to Jesus, and that's where I learned how to. And that was good enough that I learned to be a dad from him and not from my dad. Right. And that's a big deal, And I pass. I mean, to me, it's like that's what being a dad is being gentle and patient. Like one thing that I don't relate with is the concern of a dad being harsh. All this conversation, I'm like, I know that's normal. My dad had shortcomings, but being harsh with me was never. Yeah. Literally never. Cool. Never, not once. Yeah. Even when it was merited, and even when he would intentionally, count on one hand number of times that he used his strength, it wasn't harsh. It was authoritative. Yeah. But I can't point to one moment, and so for me, it's like, I've inherited that, and my sons are receiving that, and I think, and I hope that their sons will receive an understanding of being a father is being gentle, and authoritative, not a pushover, not weak, and the Lord healed that, and so there are other gaps, that my dad had a hard time befriending, and so I'm learning from my wife and my father-in-law and people like you, like how do you be a friend to your kids? And I'm doing what was implicit in Paul's message, right? And paying attention to where is this going well in the family? And in my family, it goes well even in the pockets where people don't know the Lord. My father-in-law doesn't know the Lord, but he's a good friend. Yep. And he's a good co-adventurer, And so I'm learning from that to give to my sons. So, I think we'll I think we'll kind of land the plane there. Next week,
Sounds good.
we can pick up with some more of those questions we had
Well,
intended.
next week's going to be financial, the biblical
yeah.
path, the financial piece.
Yep. But don't worry, we haven't forgot. We have some of those questions from that survey that we're going to work our way through. But we'd like to leave a little more.
Survey.
The marriage survey that we did a little while back. We still got a whole bank of them, and we'll work our way through those. But we're in no rush.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff. I just want to leave time to be able to really hang with those questions and also do a good job diving deep in each.
Well, and that's the trick,
sermon.
In our minds behind all of this is we're talking about the biblical path to relational peace, family peace, financial peace, and then sexual peace. Mm-hmm. But all of those really do affect the marriage.
Yeah.
But we broaden it because they affect more than just the marriage.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about that a lot. Like family dynamics have caused a lot of divorces in marriages because of they're so intense and so precious. But so in your marriage, just try and not be harsh.
Yeah.
And that was one of the words I feel like God spoke specifically over marriage, that the work we're doing on marriages this year is to take away some of the hard places and make them soft. The hardness becoming softer again. And so it's fun to hear stories of that happening.
Yeah.
And lots of people asking for marriage counseling right now. We have people at the marriage retreat having these marriage date nights. It's like it's happening in such a cool way, beyond just what you and I are doing, but just within our whole church. And so it's really been beautiful how the Lord's been leading us and then making good on, his part. Like we just take the little step and then he shows up with the rest. And it's been cool to see that happening and to hear of specific stories where there was hardness and coldness, and now there's a softness and warmth.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. It's like,
cool,
okay, well, I should believe it. If the Lord says go, he's going to breathe on this, we shouldn't be surprised when, the fruit shows up. But I still get super excited and surprised when it does.
He never stops surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many things I've seen the Lord do over and over and again that still shock me every time in the best way.
Yeah.
But, well, if you're still hanging with us, thanks for being with us. Thanks for watching, listening. Thanks for being a part of our church or the church, or being someone who's kind of on the outside looking in. And if that's you, maybe you're considering what it's like to be a part of church. And if you're here in the Valley, we'd love to come meet you, hang out with you, and tell you a little about how great it is getting to know Jesus. And either way, shape, or form, we will see you on Sunday.